Oh Lord, that's so cool, David. Thank you so much for your kindness. David Russell is my favorite artist of all times. I never get tired of looking at the stuff that he draws, and I think he used to do a lot of LSD. It's the only way he could come up with those kind of ideas. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Pretty special. That kind of talent is something else. Um, I got a little emotional sitting here before the meeting, looking at people as they came on, and I'm just a little bit blown away by how many people I've met over the last 3 or 4 years, and some of you I've gotten to know really well, and it's always just um, who knew that when this Zoom stuff started, we would actually be developing friendships that would be amazing. I never dreamed that anything would go beyond just this superficial, oh, yeah, I recognize that face. And oh, yeah, I've met so many people in person that I met on Zoom. And it's the most emotional stuff I've done in AA. Pretty amazing. For those that I have not met, my name is Myers Raymer. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic from Central Texas, Ingram, Texas, actually, which is in the middle of freaking nowhere. But it's really special to be here. I got sober in January the 15th of 1988, and it's funny. Somebody asked me one time. They said, "Myers, what's the lowest part of your life?" And I thought, odd question. But the answer to that was not when I was drinking and doing that all that crazy stuff. The lowest time of my life was 7 years in AA, going to 6 meetings a week, but never really understanding what the book was about, what the text was trying to teach us, never really understanding what sponsorship really was. It would take a handful of folks over the years to kind of um, change the course of what it was that I did. There were people that were really influential. The Don Pritz and Mark Houston and some of these guys who said things that always made me sit back and scratch my old beard and go, what the heck are they talking about? I don't understand what they're doing. And so I finally got introduced to a guy who kind of helped me understand a bunch of that, a guy named Cliff Bishop that passed away years ago in Dallas. And um, there used to be an old saying, we teach what we're taught, and it's so true. Depending on where you go, I've had the great fortune to travel all over the world with AA stuff. I've met a whole lot of folks. Um, I remember a lady at a meeting one night. She said, "Oh, Myers, you're so lucky that you got to do that. I guess it's a lot of fun to go to a bunch of meetings." And I went, "Sometimes it is." And she kind of looked at me and cocked her head a little bit. And she said, "What do you mean sometimes?" And I said, "Well, sometimes the meetings are a little, you know, cray cray." And she said, "Wait a minute, AA is the same everywhere." And I went, eh, as much as I would like to agree with you on that, the one thing that I can say that has never changed, I've never been in a meeting, regardless of where I was, that they weren't full of the nicest, kindest people I've ever met in my whole life. Seriously, amazing groups of people. But what they taught was often different. And as I began to move towards a big book based stuff, it began to kind of, there was some conflict there, but between what I had been taught all those years, and then what these new people were telling me and teaching me, and then I got to choose which path I wanted to be on. I come from a long line of drunks and dope fiends. We used to always laugh about it. If you kick the Raymer family tree, little drunks and dope fiends fell out all over the ground. I mean, it would be just, it was crazy. And the it goes back generations. And so when Chris, my twin brother, when Chris started manifesting alcoholic tendencies by the time he was getting out of high school, I was still able to hold it together and drank more recreationally anyway, for another decade before things began to crash there too. And it's a, y'all ever stop and think about how funny it is that we, from the first drink you ever took to the last drink you ever took, when you're maybe on life support, we don't ever know on that continuum where you are. I've seen kids 21 years old that were already in end stage alcoholism. And I've seen people that drank normal till they were 60, and then all of a sudden everything crashed and burned to the ground. We don't know where that is. And so that's the reason why I think Bill Wilson and the First 100 were brilliant in the way that they qualified in the text what we were looking at. Because if you just go to your story, it's difficult sometimes. Sometimes our stories can be confusing to some people who haven't done that. I never drank booze under a bridge. I never ate out of a dumpster. I mean, I have a couple of businesses and things that I have a building with my name on the side of it. I've got 3 airplanes and a bunch of crud. I mean, I got some stuff, and so it's hard for me sometimes to line up with some of those stories. But some of y'all have been through that stuff too. But what it did was, the reason I even mentioned this part of this is because, so here I am in 1988. Chris had been sober for 2 months ahead of me. He is maybe 20 or 30th time to get sober. He just couldn't stay sober, but this time it looked like he might actually make it. And Chris took me to my very first AA meeting, walked me in, introduced me to some people in there like that. And I mean, everything began to change. I got one sobriety day. I walked in, fell in love with that room. I mean, in those days, everybody smoked. Even if you didn't smoke, you lit a cigarette. It was crazy. And the rooms filled up with smoke, and everybody talked close to the table so they wouldn't pass out. I mean, it was insane. But we had 32 meetings a week and no literature-based meetings. 32 meetings, and they're all discussion meetings and things like this. And so some of y'all are going like, I don't get that. And listen, I'm going to 6 meetings a week, and I think I got this thing whooped. And I got a couple of years, 2, 3 years, and I'm okay. My wife, God love her, she actually let me come down to the other end of the house and live again. And I could sleep in the big bed with her. And we had another daughter. And we'd end up with 3 daughters, and it was, everything was okay. Somewhere around 3 to 4 years, I began to manifest some anxiety disorder and some depression. We got the anxiety whipped real quick, but the depression was coming back, and it was debilitating. Chris, Alonda and I are partners in this book bindery that we started a way long time ago when the earth was just cooling. And I'm to a place where I can't work. I can't go function. And I hear people, oh, I know what you mean. I get blue sometimes, and I'm going, hold up, homeboy, time out. I can't function. I'm so depressed. And I know that it's going to get worse, that I'm either going to drink again or I'm going to die. And so I'm trying to deal with all the suicidal stuff that's going through my head. And I managed to hold it together for another 2 or 3 years. I was 2 weeks shy of 7 years sober, one stupid day at a time. And I know nothing else about the program. I don't know what recovery looks like. I don't know what any of this other stuff is. Some of y'all have experienced that. Some of you guys have seen it. You've witnessed it sitting in meetings like that. This idea that somehow or another the meeting will treat everything that's going on is a wonderful thought. But there are some of us out there that it just wasn't enough. And I found myself in this situation where I was going to sort of fall on a sword in the middle of a meeting and do a big Hail Mary, I'm out of here kind of thing. I even wrote a little script thing out that I was going to read during the meeting like that. And I mean, these were my homeboys and girls there at that meeting, but I'm not going to make it. And so I sat there in a meeting one night, and I started talking, reading my little script. And there was this guy named Horse Jim. I'll never forget him like that. And Horse goes, Myers, hang on a second. Hoss, just hang on. Listen, I got to tell you, I know you're struggling, but let me just tell you what I think you need. And I'm looking at my script and I'm looking at Horse Jim and I'm looking back at the script going, dude, you just interrupted me, man. And he looks at me and he said, dude, all you need to do is go to some more meetings. And I remember looking at him like this and I remember going, okay, oh, all right. Thanks, Jim. I mean, I appreciate it, buddy. And at the end of the meeting, I sat there at the end of the meeting, I got up, threw my little script in the trash can, walked out in the middle of the summer. I walked out and sat in my old Toyota Land Cruiser that was parked out on the street, and I put my head down on the steering wheel and I cried like a little kid. I can't even begin to describe it. I'm so um, emotional. I just don't know what else to do. I got three daughters I love. I've got a wife that I adore, and a business and employees and people that are. I got a world of people around me, but I can't function. Um, and I went home and cried some more, and then I called Chris, who now lives in the hill country where I am now, and I said, Chris, hey, I'm in some real trouble, and he said, Myers, you've been in trouble for 2 years, and I said, I know, I know, I know, I know. Chris was being sponsored by a guy named Mark Houston by this time in the hill country. And Chris said, until you get involved in some book studies, until you get in some literature so that you understand what this program really is, I think you're going to struggle. And I don't see a good end to it. And he said, did you call Cliff Bishop? And I said, who? And he said, Cliff Bishop, the guy I gave you the number for 2 years ago. And I said, no, I didn't. And there was this long pause, and I finally said, Chris, are you there? And he said, yeah. He said, I'll send it. I'll give you the number. And he gave me his number again. And I called him and asked him if I could come see him. And he said, yeah, come see me in the morning and we'll visit. And so I'll make this quick. What he began to do was ask me questions about AA, questions about the big book. I mean, he's asking me these amazingly hard questions. Who are the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous? Some old dudes? I don't know. I don't know. I, I don't know. And so I'm trying to hold this stuff together. He asked me questions for about 10 minutes, and his wife, Elaine, who was a sweetheart, she got up and she was in the room with us, and she got up and she walked out of the room. And years later, she would say, Myers, that was the most contentious conversation I'd ever seen between two men before. And she said, I could tell that you didn't know the answers to any of this stuff, but you were too prideful to say, I just don't know. I'm still trying to make stuff up, shoot from the hip, this kind of stuff. Well, he finally just said, there's not much hope here unless you're willing to study some, unless you're willing to kind of get back on track. Because what the deal is, Myers, is that you're picking up the fellowship part of this without any problem. You're picking up some of this stuff there, and there's nothing wrong with that stuff. But our text never said that fellowship would keep you sober. It might help you at times. It cures loneliness like nothing I've ever seen. But he said, that's not what's going to be it. What's going to be it is to understand what the disease looks like, and then what the solution looks like, so that you can teach that to other people, so that you can carry that message. And I just said, whatever, I'll do whatever. And literally, y'all, I mean, just between me and y'all, I would have eaten a cat turd that night. I would do anything to be done with all of that stuff, that pain and suffering that I'm putting my family through, and all of that. I'm in. So my plan is to go to that book study. I'm going to go to the book study for 3 months. That's my commitment. I'm going to go to 3 months study, and then I'm going to go back to my original home group, and then I'm going to be able to kind of be an iconic AA guy. And it didn't work out that way. I ended up staying another 27 years, and then we ended up moving to the hill country, and it's sort of an amazing kind of a deal. There were a lot of people out there in AA land that were trying to teach us things a long time before all of this stuff started kind of getting weird like that. I mean, they would. How many of y'all have ever heard of a cat named Alan McGinnis? Alan McGinnis wrote they did a talk and then they cataloged it and transcribed it, and it ended up being a brochure that New York was selling, a General Service Office was selling, called A Membership's Guide to AA. No, a member eye view of AA, and this I want to read you one little paragraph out of that. But this thing was Alan McGinnis wrote this. They did this in the early '60s, was when this was written. But I found it fascinating because we're talking about something that was like 60 years ago. They wrote this, and so many of us ignored it. Listen to what he said. There's a widely held belief in AA that if a newcomer will simply continue to attend meetings, something will finally rub off on you. And the implication, of course, is that the something which rubs off will be the so-called miracle of AA. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that many people in AA accept this statement quite literally. I've observed them over the years. They faithfully attend meetings, faithfully waiting for something to rub off. The funny part about it is that the something that is rubbing off on them is death. They sit there week after month after year while mental, spiritual, and physical rigor mortis slowly sets in. Ow. So certainly this is not true in everybody's life. This is not true in everybody's experience. But for me, this was some kind of hand of the creator in the middle of this thing, showing me that there were people out there that genuinely were willing to say things that nobody else wanted to say. Let me give you another great example. How many y'all ever heard of a guy named Don Pritz? Some of you have. Don Pritz was an iconic guy in the Denver, Colorado area. He sobered up in the federal penitentiary system in the early '60s, and was some of the stuff that he wrote was pretty amazing. I had an opportunity to talk with him a couple of times, and he's just an amazing kind of guy. But what he did more than anything was start meetings. The cat was unbelievable at starting book studies, and then he'd move over and start another book study, and then they would take over and he'd start another one and start another, and he did it his whole sober life. I have no idea how many meetings he actually started, but it was phenomenal. But one of the things that he said in an early talk that really blew me away. Now this is Don Pritz talking, and Don says, I'm concerned these days. I'm concerned that we spend more time talking about sobriety and less time talking about recovery. And when I first heard it, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. I didn't quite understand what the deal was. And then later I listened to the deal again, and I finally understood what he was talking about. We're obsessed with this idea worldwide of being sober one day at a time. In the words of my friend Mickey Bush, so's the cat. But here's the problem. I'm not knocking the sober part. I'm just saying if we put all the eggs in the basket where all we're doing is leaning into this idea of being sober one day at a time, we're missing the bigger part about what our literature was trying to teach us. I can tell by looking at some of y'all don't dig that idea at all. I like being sober, right? Listen, I totally dig being sober. But when you start connecting the dots in the literature and you start looking what recovery actually is, it's a game changer, y'all. It's an absolute game changer because it affects everything about what we do. Let me tell you a crazy story. It's a real fast, crazy story. I worked some part-time when we sold our big bindery in Dallas. I had some time. I didn't know what to do, and I took a part-time job teaching Big Book at a place down in South Texas, right on the border of Mexico and Texas. And there's a bunch of winter Texans that come down there every winter, and they're delightful folks, and I love talking to them. I made some great friendships with those folks. But we used to have a candlelight meeting on Saturday night, and I would bring a bunch of the men at that treatment place. I would bring a bunch of them over, and we would sit in the meeting, and then I'd take them back to treatment. And this guy was telling this crazy story one night. This guy's he's been dead for a number of years now, but he was telling this story about being on the beach with a dog, his dog, that didn't have a leash, and you can't do that down there. It's a big deal to have an unleashed dog on a public beach. And so they called the cops, and the cops came out. It got into a goofy deal, and so he's burning up time in this meeting talking about this ordeal with the police and blah blah blah. And I mean, I'm like, there's steam slowly coming out of my ears because he's just wasting a bunch of time talking about something that's not important. And then he stops for a minute and he pauses, and I think he's done. And then all of a sudden he leans forward and he said, "And for you big book guys in here, let me tell you something you need to pay attention to. This program is about how we stay sober one day at a time. It's got nothing to do with how we live our life." Now, I'm almost catatonic by this time like this because I'm going, now, wait a minute. What did this guy just say? I've got a room full of men early in sobriety. They're trying to figure out where they're going to be, what path they're going to be on. And he's selling them an idea that is 100% opposite. It's 180 degrees off of what my philosophy is now, because I've been studying the text for a bunch of years. And I realize over and over and over again, they alert us to this amazing idea that we could have a transformed life that is so amazingly different. I mean, when you start looking at the steps in the big book, you're like this, what do you got? You got an eighth of an inch worth of instructions. And then everything else is about how we work that stuff into changing our life, which is just crazy. I mean, why would I want to be sober if all it is me being sober and I'm crazier than a crap house rat? I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, and all of a sudden I realized that what they were offering me was more. There was more, and that was where things got really special for me in the big picture of this stuff. Mark Houston used to say in some talks that he did that he said, the one thing that bothers me is why it is that people settle for less. I always smell more. And I used to always laugh when he said it because it really didn't make much sense to me. But the reality is that later I really understood what he was saying, that there is so much more to the text and to our program than this idea of just being sober. So my sponsor, Cliff Bishop, was sponsored by Joe McQuaney, with Joe and Charlie. So you can sort of see where that sponsorship lineage was going like this. And I used to spend a bunch of time with Joe and Joe and Cliff Bishop at the same time. Joe would come up from Arkansas and stay with Cliff, and then I would go over to Cliff's place and we'd eat breakfast together and lunch together and dinner, and we were always kind of hanging out. And Joe one day was looking at me like this, and he said, "Myers," he said, I'm concerned about you." And it was kind of funny because I looked at Clifford and I was hoping that Clifford would take my side. And finally I looked at him and I just said, what are you concerned about, Joe? And he said, "Myers," he said, "you've been sober now, how long?" "Almost 10 years. How many men are you sponsoring?" And I said, "None." And he said, "Interesting, interesting." And he looked at Clifford and Clifford looked at me, and then Joe said, "Listen, I care about you and I want to tell you the truth." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "One of these days you're going to have this miraculous moment in AA when you connect dots and you realize that your job in AA is to feed, not be fed. Because right now, all you're doing is waiting for somebody to say something pithy so you can copy it and share it in the meeting or whatever you do." But my point is, you're clear on that, like that you're not doing anything. I said, "Well, I make coffee sometimes." He said, I don't think that's what Bill Wilson was talking about. Look at how many times the word approached is used in the book. Our job, the way the text was laid out, was to approach others and teach what this program was about, help them understand how different their life could be. And I began to realize what he was saying. So within a couple of weeks, I started really paying attention. I got hypersensitive to what was going on in meetings. I got really, I got spanked by Clifford at one more meeting. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and he said, Myers, he said, why is it that you won't sponsor men? And I said, I'm not smart enough. And he said, I just don't agree with that. And I went, well, okay. He said, I tell you what, why don't you meet me at Salvation Army tomorrow night? This story is real fast. I want to get into some other important stuff. But he said, will you meet me at Salvation Army? And I said, absolutely. I said, Clifford, half the time you're at Salvation Army, I'm the one driving your car. I'm the one carrying your big books in there and stuff. And he said, and then you go outside and lean against the building and talk on your phone. And I went, well, there is that. There is that. I won't lie to you like that. And so he's finally kind of shamed me into going. I went over there, looking around. Cliff's not there. And John's not there, and Stan's not there, and the people that always go with us were not there. And I'm looking around and I'm going, this is not good. This is a huge facility in Dallas with 170 men in this room, and somebody's got to go in there and carry that meeting. And nobody else showed up from our group. Now I'm going to tell you, 20 years later, everybody still pretends that I didn't know that they had set me up, because they did. I mean, it was as simple as that, like that. They agreed to get me to go over there. They weren't going to show up. And I stood at the turning point. I had to either go in, do the thing, or leave. And so I didn't want them to lose the gig. And so I went in, I knew where we were in the big book, did the big book study. And it was life-changing. People say, Myers, what's the most life-changing thing you ever did? The Salvation Army with 170 men standing in that room, listening to us do this big book study and watching their faces as they began to connect up dots. I said, it was pure magic. It's funny. After I got done that night, I started walking toward the door, and this guy said, hey, they always call me Mr. Myers. I don't know why. Mr. Myers, can you come back tomorrow night? And that wasn't one of our regular nights. And I said, well, if they'll let me come back, I guess I will. And so I'm standing close to this door, and I'm real emotional, and there's this thing going through me. Part of me is pissed as I can be that if I'd have walked a little faster, I could have got out the door ahead of that question, and I could have milked it for 20 years. Yeah, I did that talk out there to Sally. That's exactly what I was going to do, like that. And it didn't. But I walked too slow, and the guy snagged me. And I'm always grateful that he did, because I got up the next morning completely different. I mean, my wife was asking me before we went to work. She said, Myers, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm going to go to the Salvation Army again tonight. And she said, well, you seem different this morning. And I said, well, I guess I am. And so I messed around at work for 2 or 3 hours. And then I looked at her and I said, I got to go. And she said, Myers, what time's that talk? And I said, I think 7 o'clock. And she goes, 7 o'clock? And come on, Myers, it's not even lunchtime yet. Come on, let's get some work done. And I went, okay, homegirl. And I worked for another hour. And then I said, I got to go. And I went home, changed clothes, got ready, got all primped up. I was all ready to go do this thing. Walked in. All of these men are walking across this deal. And I think there's all of a sudden this moment of being scared because they're walking a little too fast. And one guy, there's this huge guy, one of the biggest men I've ever seen. I'm not kidding you. His arms, his biceps were as big around as my waist. He's just an enormous guy like that. He was probably 8 inches taller than me, and he walked right up to me. And when he got real close to me, he just hugged me. That's what he did. But when he hugged me, he picked me up, and it was the weirdest thing. I had my hands like this on his chest, and I'm pushing back a little bit, and he's just kind of picked me up like that. And I'm just kind of going, okay, this man means no harm to me whatsoever. If he wanted to harm me, he would have already crushed me like a spider. I mean, this was not about that. I mean, this is man love right here. And I was digging the shit out of it. It was just great. And so I remember just turning my head like this and laying my head down on his chest like that. And to this day, all these years later, I can still remember what that guy's shirt felt like and it was just, and eventually he said, Myers, he said, we've been looking forward to you coming all day. And I went, golly, me too. And he set me down on the floor and we had this meeting. And I don't know if any of y'all are old enough in here. Some of you are old enough to remember Jimmy Swaggart on TV when he used to have a Bible in one hand like this and he'd be sweating everywhere like this and he'd be just like lathered up like that. That's exactly the way I felt in that meeting that night. It was just, my rap name should have been Little Sweat. I was just, I was just, it was crazy. I got done. And after that meeting, we were doing the Lord's Prayer, and which is still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck like that, thinking about 170 guys saying the Lord's Prayer in that little gymnasium. And we dropped hands, and this guy said, "Mr. Myers, can you sponsor me?" And another guy goes, "Me too, me too, me too." I ended up with 4 guys that night that I'm now sponsoring. And you can imagine how long it took me to call Cliff Bishop afterwards. And it was a game changer. And it changed everything from that moment on. It was the most transformative thing that I'd ever done, because I realized that left on my own device, a lot of y'all will be just like me. You'll crawl up in your head and you'll convince yourself, I'm too slow, I'm too busy, I'm too this, I'm too that. You'll 100 excuses why you can't be of service and try to help somebody. And Bob Darrell, in a talk he did 20 years ago, said, we're the turd in our own punch bowl. And it made me laugh every time I think about it, because it's the truth. The only thing standing between me and this unbelievably transformed existence is me. I get to make the decision whether I help somebody else. I get to make the decision whether I pray and meditate. I get to make those decisions. And they are game changers, although intellectually they don't seem to make much sense. I mean, I've been sober 37 years now, and I'm telling you, they still don't make much sense to me. But it's a reality for sure. There's a couple of things I want to read real quick before we get out of here. There in 1944, 42, Bill Wilson wrote this thing that said, our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program. Our chief responsibility to the newcomer wasn't to buy him dinner. It wasn't to help him move. It wasn't to pick up crap out of his yard. It wasn't, y'all understand? Our chief responsibility to the newcomer was an adequate presentation of the program, which brings into the next comment. If I don't understand what the program is, how can I teach it? That's the reason why the text got to be so important, why book studies got to be so consuming for me, because I realized how much freedom it gave me when I understood what it was I was supposed to teach. And there's a little piece here. I've got this online. I can send it to you too, called Whose Responsibility? And at the end of this was a letter that Bill wrote in 1966. I'm skipping some paragraphs. At the very bottom, it said, this is why sobriety, freedom from alcohol through the teaching and practice of AA's 12 steps is the sole purpose of the group. If we don't stick to this cardinal principle, we shall almost certainly collapse. And if we collapse, we cannot help anyone. I mean, that's fairly profound, but it also sets some perimeters. It sets some boundaries. If freedom from alcohol through the teaching and practice of AA's 12 steps is the sole purpose of the group, it sets a different baseline. It sets a different deal. Somebody sent me one time here just recently a little chip sale thing. I'm not going to get into a bunch of it, but it's from the intergroup office in Harris County. Harris County's in Houston. It's in East Texas, right over by Houston, Texas, and it's a huge metropolitan area, enormous. But these figures on the desire chips that are sold, I know this is not science, but it does indicate something. In the desire chips in 2024, they sold 8,810 desire chips. 1 month, I'm not going to go any farther than that. 1 month chips, they sold 3,862. So you've got almost 5,000 people that picked up a desire chip but didn't come back. Now, listen, I get it that there are people that decide they don't want to do AA, they don't want to whatever. I get that. But I think it's important for us to understand from a statistical basis. At some point, we as members of Alcoholics Anonymous become culpable to what's going on. We need to be ready to at least accept the fact that maybe there are AA groups out there that aren't teaching the steps, that aren't teaching the basic text, that aren't, they're there for your needs and wants and desires. They're there for all that. I'm not knocking that. But maybe we're not giving them what they need. And that's always a bit troubling to look at it from that perspective. I remember 25 years ago doing some book studies in Great Britain, and we couldn't find one book study in the entire London metropolitan area. We couldn't find one literature book study in that whole area. And within 6 months of doing these book studies there were 10 that had started. And it will change everything about AA in your particular area once you lean into some of those book studies. When Cliff Bishop and those guys started Primary Purpose Group in Dallas, and we wrote the study guide in 2000, so it's 25 years ago that we wrote that study guide. There were people in Dallas at groups that thought we were Satan incarnate. I mean, they thought we were evil because we didn't have any discussion meetings at our group. We had 2 meetings a week, and they were both book studies, and they thought it was horrible. I thought Clifford was making it all up. And he said, call the Dallas Intergroup and see what they say. Just ask for a meeting over in this area. And I called the Intergroup office and I said, hey, I just landed at Love Field and I'm looking for a book study, man, kind of over in the Midway area, Northwest Highway area. And this gal that was on there, she goes, oh, there's no book studies in that part of the city like that. But if you wait till 8 o'clock, I won't say what it is, the group down the way there on Midway, they have a great meeting down there. And I went, so there's no book studies? And she goes, oh, no book study. Y'all see what I'm saying? They wouldn't recognize us as an AA group because we didn't have a bunch of discussion meetings. But anyhow, enough of that. Let me tell you, being in a position to be of service, being in a position to learn what it is that I need to be teaching people in the text can be a little daunting if you haven't done it like that. But I'm amazed at how many people I've met over the years in these meetings in person who are 17 years sober, 20 years sober, 25 years sober, and they're still like I was. They still are way shy of trying to sponsor people, and they're really struggling. Let me tell you, y'all, I've never, ever met people in AA that didn't drift some. Me, everybody else I've known, at some point in time, you'll drift sideways a little bit. And 99% of the time, it's because we stop doing the things that work, that we're supposed to be doing. And most of that is around step 11 and step 12. Sometime when you don't have anything else to do, go back and read page 60 to 63 from the ABCs to the 3rd step prayer, and then read it again, and then later read it again, and see if you can relate to the stage character guy that they're talking about. Guys, it's crazy how you'll find yourself realizing that you've been sober for a bunch of years, but you're still a bit of a stage character. You're still kind of playing that game. I'm a spiritual giant walking out of a meeting, and then 2 hours later, I'm cussing, lying, gossiping, doing all this crazy stuff. That's what drifting looks like. That's not what a recovery looks like. And so, or do this. Go back and read the promises. Read those promises and ask yourself, how many of these promises have manifested in my life? One of the most eye-opening things that ever happened to me is when I'm reading a big old bunch of promises and I'm going, nope, that hadn't, nope, that, no. And I realized that most of the promises have never manifested in my life. And then that's when I doubled down and started doing the things that I was supposed to do, work and self-sacrifice for others, and developing a relationship with my Creator. And all of a sudden I realized all of those promises were true in my life. And it was that's what transformational stuff actually looks like. And then we get to decide, do we want to live that, or do we want to live AA light and just keep going to a bunch of meetings and doing a bunch of whatever? I know it'll drive some of you crazy. But let me just tell you, driving to a place where you're doing an H&I, where you're doing some service work like this, you'll be amazed at how your life will change when you go doing it. You're not going to want to do it driving over there. And then after you get done and you're driving back home, I used to drive back home, turn on some old Marvin Gaye and listen to this stuff. And I've never felt more close to God than I did in those years that I was doing that service work. It's the most amazing change that'll ever happen to you. So if you're feeling a little stale, just hit the do-over button. Get busy trying to help somebody and watch what happens. All right. I need to shut up so y'all can go have a decent night. I love y'all. Thank you so much for your kindness. I sure appreciate it.